Jessica, why are you always holding that phone? My brother's voice dripped with irritation as I quietly positioned my phone to record another family dinner. It's weird. We're trying to have a conversation, and you're over there making home movies like we're some kind of documentary. The laughter that followed from my parents and sister was the same dismissive sound I'd heard for 3 years, ever since I'd started documenting every interaction, every promise broken, every cruel comment disguised as family concern. They thought I was paranoid, obsessive, maybe even a little unhinged. But sitting in that courtroom 6 months later, watching my mother's face drain of color as Judge Williams pressed play on my phone footage, I realized that sometimes, being called paranoid is just the price you pay for being prepared. If you've ever been the family member who sees what others pretend doesn't exist, this story's for you. Let me know in the comments if you've ever had to prove your own reality to people who should have protected it. My name is Jessica Martinez. I'm 30 years old, and I started recording my family interactions the day I realized that gaslighting only works when there's no evidence. What began as protecting myself from psychological manipulation became the documentation that would expose a pattern of elder abuse that had been hiding in plain sight for years. The Martinez family looked perfect from the outside, successful, close-knit, the kind of tidy, multi-generational household that magazines feature in heartwarming articles about family values. My parents, Miguel and Rosa, had built a comfortable life through Dad's construction business and Mom's work as a school administrator. At 73 and 71, they'd moved in with my brother Carlos and his wife Linda after Dad's first heart attack, made living independently seem risky. Carlos, 35, was the family golden child who'd stepped seamlessly into managing Dad's business, while providing a beautiful home where our parents could age gracefully. His wife Linda was the perfect daughter-in-law, attentive, organized, always ready with medical appointments, meal planning and social activities that kept our parents engaged and happy. My sister Monica, 27, lived nearby and visited regularly, often bringing her two young children to brighten our parents' days. She worked part-time as a dental hygienist and devoted considerable energy to family caregiving and coordination. Then there was me, the unmarried daughter who lived across town, worked as a physical therapist, and apparently had boundary issues that made family relationships complicated and stressful for everyone involved. At least, that was the narrative that had developed over the past 3 years as I'd begun questioning decisions being made about our parents' care, finances, and daily lives. The problem started small, and grew slowly, in ways that were easy to dismiss individually but alarming when viewed as a pattern. Dad's credit cards were simplified by being consolidated under Carlos's management. Mom's prescription medications were organized by Linda to ensure proper dosing. Their social activities were coordinated to reduce confusion and transportation burden. Each change was presented as necessary care for aging parents who needed more support and supervision. But what I observed during family visits was increasing isolation, diminished autonomy, and growing dependence on Carlos and Linda for basic decisions that our parents had always managed independently. Mom seems confused about her medications, I mentioned during one Sunday dinner. She told me she doesn't remember agreeing to let Linda manage her prescriptions. Jessica, Mom gets overwhelmed by all the different pills and timing requirements, Linda replied with patient concern. It's much safer for me to organize everything and make sure she takes the right doses at the right times. But she's been managing her own medications successfully for years. When did this become a safety issue? Carlos stepped in with mild irritation. Jessica, you don't live here. You don't see how much Mom struggles with organization and memory issues. Linda and I are with them every day and we can see when they need additional support. The conversation was reasonable, caring, and completely dismissive of my observations and our parents' own preferences. More troubling was the subtle implication that my concerns were inappropriate interference from someone who didn't understand the full situation. Similar patterns emerged around Dad's business finances, their social activities, medical appointments, and household routines. Decisions were made for their own good without meaningful input from Mom and Dad, then presented as fait accompli that would be unreasonable to question. When I suggested that our parents might prefer to maintain more control over their own lives, I was told I was being unrealistic about aging, insensitive to caregiver burden, and disruptive to family harmony. Jessica, you have this idealistic view of independence that doesn't account for practical safety concerns, Monica explained during one family gathering. Carlos and Linda are doing incredible work caring for Mom and Dad, and you're making it harder by questioning every decision. The message was clear. My role was to appreciate the care being provided, not to advocate for our parents' autonomy or question the methods being used to manage their lives. But what I witnessed during visits suggested that mom and dad were increasingly uncomfortable with arrangements they'd supposedly agreed to. They seemed anxious about finances they could no longer access, confused about medical decisions being made without their input, and isolated from friends and activities they'd previously enjoyed. The breaking point came when I arrived for Sunday dinner and found Mom crying quietly in her bedroom. "Mom, what's wrong? Jessica, I don't understand what's happening to our money. Carlos says we can't afford the senior center activities anymore, but those programs cost $20 a month. We used to spend more than that on dinner out." I sat beside her on the bed where she'd slept for 47 years of marriage, now in a house that didn't feel like home anymore. "Mom, what do you mean you can't afford activities? Linda says the medical expenses and household costs mean we need to be very careful about discretionary spending. But I don't understand why prescription drugs that cost $30 a month prevent us from going to bridge club." The math didn't make sense. Dad's Social Security and pension provided over $4,000 monthly, and their medical expenses were largely covered by Medicare and supplemental insurance. Even accounting for reasonable household contributions to Carlos and Linda, there should have been plenty of money for basic activities and personal expenses. "Mom, can I look at your financial statements? I don't have them anymore. Carlos manages everything through online banking to make it easier for us." That's when I realized that making it easier had evolved into complete financial control, with our parents having no access to their own account information or SB ending decisions. I started recording family interactions that day. Not because I planned to create legal evidence, but because I needed to document what was actually happening versus what was being presented as caring family support. I needed proof of conversations that would later be denied, promises that would be forgotten, and patterns that were invisible when viewed individually. The first recording captured a conversation about Dad's truck, which Carlos wanted to sell for safety reasons. "Dad, do you want to sell your truck?" I asked while my phone captured the exchange. "No, I don't want to sell it. I've been driving for 60 years without accidents." "Why would I sell my truck?" "Because Linda thinks it's safer if Carlos drives you places instead of you driving yourself," Mom interjected. "I didn't ask Linda. I asked Dad." Carlos entered the conversation with practiced patience. "Jessica, Dad's reflexes aren't what they used to be. We've seen some close calls in parking lots in residential neighborhoods. Selling the truck is about protecting him and protecting other drivers." "Dad, have you had any accidents or close calls that concerned you?" "No, I haven't had any problems driving." "I don't understand why everyone thinks I can't drive my own truck." The recording captured Dad's clear preference, and Carlos's override of that preference based on safety concerns that Dad didn't share or understand. It also captured the family dynamic where Dad's own assessment of his abilities was dismissed in favor of decisions made by others for his own good. Over the following months, I recorded dozens of similar interactions, financial decisions made without parental input, social activities canceled for practical reasons, medical appointments scheduled without their knowledge, household changes implemented despite their objections. Each individual decision seemed reasonable and caring. The pattern revealed systematic elimination of autonomy disguised as loving support. The recordings also captured more troubling behaviors, Linda snapping at Mom when she asked questions about her medications, Carlos threatening to reconsider living arrangements when Dad complained about losing access to his own bank account, Monica pressuring Mom to sign documents without explaining their contents. What had started as well-intentioned caregiving had evolved into something that looked increasingly like financial and emotional elder abuse, enabled by family dynamics that discouraged questioning and prioritized caregiver convenience over parental autonomy. But when I tried to discuss these patterns during family meetings, I was dismissed as paranoid, overly suspicious, and disruptive to family harmony. "Jessica, you're seeing problems that don't exist," Carlos said during one particularly tense conversation. "You're creating conflict where there should be gratitude for the care Mom and Dad are receiving. You're recording us?" Linda asked when she noticed my phone position to capture our discussion. "That's incredibly invasive and inappropriate." "Why is it inappropriate to record family conversations?" "Because it creates distrust and paranoia. We're family, not adversaries. The fact that you feel the need to record us says more about your mental state than about our caregiving." My mental state. The problem wasn't potential elder abuse, It was my psychological issues that made me perceive normal caregiving as something sinister. But the recordings didn't lie, and the pattern they revealed became impossible to ignore when viewed comprehensively. The crisis came when I discovered that Carlos had applied for guardianship over both parents, without their knowledge or consent, claiming they were no longer competent to make financial and medical decisions independently. The guardianship petition described mom and dad as confused, financially irresponsible, and requiring supervision for their own safety. It requested legal authority for Carlos to make all major decisions about their care, living arrangements, finances, and medical treatment. I learned about the petition by accident, when a friend who worked in the court clerk's office mentioned seeing the Martinez family name on guardianship filings. "Jessica, didn't you tell me your parents moved in with your brother? There's a guardianship case filed by someone with their names." I requested copies of the court documents immediately, and discovered that Carlos had been building a case for incompetence based on incidents and behaviors that had never been discussed with me or apparently with our parents themselves. The petition claimed Dad had become confused about financial management, cited instances of poor judgment regarding driving and household safety, and described both parents as unable to understand complex medical decisions. None of this matched my observations during regular visits, and none of it had been presented to me as evidence of declining competence requiring legal intervention. I hired an attorney that same week. "Jessica, this is a serious situation," attorney Sarah Kim explained, after reviewing the guardianship petition. "If this succeeds, your parents will lose all legal rights to make decisions about their own lives. Everything, finances, medical care, living arrangements, will be controlled by your brother. Can we contest it? Absolutely. But we'll need evidence that your parents retain competence to make their own decisions. Do you have documentation of their mental state, their preferences, their ability to understand and communicate their wishes?" I showed her my phone with 3 months of recorded conversations. "Jessica, this is exactly what we need. These recordings show your parents expressing clear preferences, asking reasonable questions, and demonstrating understanding of their situations. This directly contradicts the incompetence claims in the guardianship petition." The court hearing was scheduled for 6 weeks later, with Carlos's attorney presenting evidence of diminished capacity and my attorney arguing for continued autonomy with appropriate support services. But the moment that changed everything came when Judge Williams asked to hear directly from mom and dad about their preferences for their own care and decision-making. Carlos's attorney had prepared our parents to repeat talking points about feeling overwhelmed by complex decisions and grateful for family assistance with management responsibilities. But when Judge Williams asked specific questions about their understanding of the guardianship process and their actual preferences for autonomy versus assistance, their responses contradicted everything in the petition. "Mr. Martinez, do you understand what guardianship means?" Judge Williams asked Dad directly. "I understand it means Carlos would make all decisions about my money, my medical care, and where I live. I don't understand why that's necessary when I can make those decisions myself. Have you been experiencing confusion or memory problems that make it difficult to manage your affairs?" "No, Your Honor. I don't have access to my bank accounts anymore because Carlos manages them online, but that doesn't mean that I can't understand my own finances." Judge Williams turned to Mom. "Mrs. Martinez, how do you feel about having your son make major decisions about your life? I appreciate Carlos's help, but I don't want him to have legal control over everything I do. I'm not confused about what I want or what I need." The clarity and competence of their responses directly contradicted the guardianship petition's claims about diminished capacity and need for complete decision-making assistance. That's when my attorney requested permission to play selected recordings that demonstrated our parents' consistent competence and clear preferences over the previous months. "Your Honor, Ms. Martinez has documented numerous conversations that show her parents expressing coherent preferences about their care, finances, and living arrangements. These recordings directly contradict claims about incompetence and inability to make informed decisions." Judge Williams agreed to review the evidence, and my attorney played 3 recordings that captured mom and dad discussing their concerns about financial access, their preferences for maintaining independence, and their confusion about decisions being made without their input. The courtroom was completely silent as my parents' voices filled the room, expressing exactly the competence and autonomy that the guardianship petition claimed they lacked. Carlos and Linda sat frozen as they heard their own voices on The recordings dismissing parental preferences and making decisions without consultation. Monica looked mortified as the recordings revealed the gap between our parents' actual wishes and the care being provided in their best interests. Most damaging was a recording where Carlos explicitly stated that guardianship would make everything easier by eliminating the need to consult with mom and dad about decisions affecting their lives. Your Honor, Carlos's attorney requested after the recordings ended, we'd like to request a brief recess to consult with our clients. Request denied, Judge Williams replied firmly. I've heard enough evidence to make a determination. The judge's ruling was swift and comprehensive. The guardianship petition was denied. Carlos was ordered to restore our parents access to their own financial accounts, and the court appointed an independent elder care advocate to monitor the family situation and ensure our parents' rights were protected. Most significantly, Judge Williams acknowledged that my recordings had prevented what could have been a serious violation of our parents' civil rights. Ms. Martinez, your documentation of these conversations may have saved your parents from losing fundamental autonomy based on questionable claims about their competence. After the hearing, Carlos and Linda approached me outside the courtroom, their expressions mixing anger, embarrassment, and something that might have been relief. Jessica, we never meant for this to become a legal battle, Carlos said quietly. We were trying to take care of them. Carlos, taking care of someone doesn't mean taking control of someone. There's a difference between support and supervision. Linda looked genuinely confused, but they needed help managing everything. It was becoming overwhelming for them. They needed help accessing services and information, not help being replaced as decision-makers in their own lives. The conversation that followed was the most honest family discussion we'd had in years. Carlos acknowledged that caregiving responsibilities had gradually expanded into control mechanisms. Linda admitted that managing our parents' lives had become easier than consulting them about their preferences. Monica recognized that she'd enabled concerning patterns by not questioning decisions that made everyone's life more convenient except our parents. 6 months later, our family had restructured caregiving to support our parents' autonomy rather than replace it. Mom and Dad maintained control over their finances, medical decisions, and social activities, with assistants accessing services and information when needed. Carlos continued managing practical aspects of Dad's business, but with transparency and consultation that respected Dad's continued ownership. Linda helped coordinate medical appointments and transportation, but without controlling access to healthcare information or decision-making. Most importantly, our parents regained agency in their own lives while retaining family support for areas where they genuinely wanted assistance. The recordings had saved more than their legal rights. They'd preserved their dignity and autonomy during a period when both were being systematically eroded through well-intentioned but controlling caregiving. If you're still reading this, drop evidence in the comments if you understand us. That sometimes protecting people requires documenting the truth that others don't want to acknowledge. The lesson I learned from recording my family wasn't about legal strategy or elder abuse prevention. It was about the difference between reality and perception, especially in situations where people have incentives to reinterpret controlling behavior as caring support. Gaslighting works by making victims doubt their own perceptions of reality. When family members consistently dismiss your observations, reframe concerning behaviors as necessary care, and suggest that your questions indicate paranoia or mental health issues, documentation becomes a form of self-protection and advocacy. My recordings didn't create the problems in our family. They revealed patterns that had been developing gradually and being rationalized continuously. Without evidence, my concerns would have remained paranoid suspicions that could be dismissed by people who preferred comfortable narratives to difficult truths. Elder abuse often happens through incremental erosion of autonomy disguised as increasing care. Adult children who genuinely love their parents can gradually assume control over decisions, finances, and daily life choices, while convincing themselves and others that they're providing necessary support for diminished capacity. The most insidious aspect is how easily this pattern can be justified and defended. Every individual decision seems reasonable, caring, and practical. The cumulative effect, complete loss of autonomy and agency, becomes visible only when viewed comprehensively over time. Family members who question these patterns are often characterized as disruptive, unrealistic about aging, or insufficiently grateful for the care being provided. These characterizations can be effective ways to silence advocates and maintain systems that serve caregivers more than the people supposedly being cared for. Documentation provides protection against these dynamics by creating objective records of what's actually happening versus what's being claimed or remembered. It allows patterns to be seen clearly and prevents individual incidents from being dismissed, rationalized, or forgotten. Tell me about a time when you had to document your reality because others were trying to rewrite it. How did having evidence change the conversation, and what would you say to someone who's being told they're paranoid for noticing concerning patterns?